Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Transparency and Ethic. We just had a little house cleaning to do here when one committee is a little late. It's getting everything set up, so we're ready to go now. So first of all, good morning. And do we have any bill introductions from the audience today? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on. We have a busy day. We'll get everyone in here, but our first conferee, we have an update from the Kansas Governmental Ethics Commission, and Mark Scoldland, Executive Director, is here to speak to us. Good morning, Mark.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chairperson and members of the committee. I always appreciate the opportunity to be over here and get to talk about the work of the Ethics Commission, and I really appreciate that opportunity. I talk a little loudly. I will do my best to not have microphone feedback. Apologies to people listening online or on WebEx. So today I'm going to go over the annual report, which just itemizes and goes over some of the activities of the Ethics Commission in 2020. A note, 2020 is, we talk about the things almost always in the space of fiscal years, which means that the last election, there's going to be quite a few stats that will appear in the report that's issued next year, but those stats are not part of this report. So sometimes people look for this report and try to find those campaign finance aggregate statistics. That's next year. So we can always provide them though, however, if anyone ever wants them, and we sometimes do tweet those as well. But today I'm going to start off by starting on page 6 of the annual report. And we're going to talk about our education focus on public awareness. One of the big issues that we confront as a state agency is people being aware of their ethics obligations. And as a result, we typically do quite a few trainings. Now, historically, these trainings have always been in person and typically ad hoc rather than online or large scheduled events. We've been trying to push for online training, but we hadn't done that quite yet. In fiscal year 2020, we actually made 13 presentations, which was an increase from previous years already. However, all of those presentations occurred prior to the pandemic. We did not do any presentations from the early days of the pandemic to the end of the fiscal year. Now we're pushing towards online training, and I'm actually working right now on a all state employee training video, which all state employees would be able to attend. And frankly, we'd be very excited about this. There's a lot of state employees that we frankly can never get in front of to give ethics trainings to because they're not in Topeka. And so this would be a great opportunity for us. So we're going to, that's one of the plans that we have while we are ramping up our training again. We also issue advisory opinions. We issued 4 opinions in fiscal year 20. 3 of those were on state conflict of interest, and 1 was for local conflict of interests. It was an odd year in that we didn't issue any campaign finance opinions, but we've had a few since then. So, on page 7, even though it wasn't a state election year, there are certainly campaign expenditure reports that still get filed. So, look at our review and audit program. We looked over 1,377 receipts and expenditures reports that were filed in fiscal year 20. For each one of those reports, every single line is considered in a desk review for compliance, and every line is also hand entered into a database, which we will talk about in a little later. That processed 517 state candidates, 1,070 county candidates, 242 city candidates, and 435 parties and PACs. The next item I want to make sure to discuss is on page 9. Just very briefly, quite a few state employees, as well as candidates and legislators, have to file statements of substantial interest in order to enforce the conflict of interest law. I'm one of these individuals that has to file one of these SSI forms. In total, in fiscal year 20, 5,557 reports were filed. This is relatively consistent with most other years as well. On page 10, there were 552 lobbyists registered for calendar year 20, representing 1,644 organizations. It is perhaps not surprising to anyone that lobbying expenses were down quite a bit in the last fiscal year, or in the last calendar year. There were $770,000 approximately that were spent up until the January report, so across most of the reporting period. And you've got a comparison in the appendix to compare this to previous years as well, but you'll notice that this is a rather substantial decrease in lobbyist expenditures. That was 7,752 lobbyist reports that were filed, and that does not count the January report. But something that I do think is worth highlighting here as well, on the January report, which typically is the most difficult report to gain lobbyist reporting compliance, because frankly, a lot of lobbyists think they are done when they file their previous report in September or October. Once that's filed, they don't think about the fact that they still have an end-of-year report. So it's difficult to gain compliance sometimes in that January report. But of 1,028 lobbyists that had to file, or 1,028 reports that had to be filed, we only sent 3 failure to files, a 99.7% compliance rate, which is largely attributable to not just the excellent lobbyists in the state, but also certainly our lobbyist desk, which I'm very lucky to have some great staff in the office. On page 11 is a look at our enforcement program. In fiscal year 20, the Commission conducted 30 investigations. This is a high number compared to previous years. The last couple of years have been in these low 30s range for a while. Previous to that had often been in single digits. There's nothing perhaps unique about the current era. We just have a lot of active investigations right now. There were 15 complaints that were filed in fiscal year 20. 7 of those were dismissed because there was insufficient evidence to support a probable cause determination. 1 dismissed after probable cause was found but before a hearing was held, and 7 complaints that had public hearings. On the bottom, there's a quick overview of civil penalties and fines. Civil penalties are automatically assessed for late filing of reports. Hopefully none of you have ever had to deal with that. But the Commission is also authorized to waive civil penalties upon a finding of good cause, which can be for any reason the Commission determines is good cause. There were civil penalties totaling $38,610 assessed, and of those, because the Commission is understanding of issues that people encounter, $10,680 of that was waived. On page 12 discusses the civil fines. We assessed $14,100 of civil fines as a result of 4 civil fine hearings. Half of those were simply failure to file documents timely. Now, on page 13 begins our legislative recommendations, so perhaps now is a good time that I can pause if there are any questions about the work of the Commission before I dive into the legislative recommendations for the 2021 legislature.
Thank you, Mark. We have a question here. Senator Dahl.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mark, for coming. People who get busted have to pay these fines. Can they pay those fines, or do they pay those fines with their campaign funds, or this comes out?
They are permitted to pay fines from their campaign fund. That is correct.
Senator Warren.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Scoldland, for appearing today. I'm looking at page 3, the current commission members. Did I miss hearing how those are selected, how the commission members are selected, and how long is their term?
So each commissioner serves a 2-year term. It's staggered, so 5 of them are appointed in 1 year, 4 in the other. The commissioners are appointed from a variety of areas of state government. 2 are from the governor, 1 the Secretary of State, 1 the Chief Justice, 1 the Attorney General, and then 4 from legislative leadership. 1 Senate Republicans, 1 House Republicans, 1 Senate Democrats, 1 House Democrats. And also no more than 5 members can be from 1 political party. And finally, there's very stringent limitations on prior political activities by those individuals. So for example, if someone is ever a treasurer of a county party, they can never serve as a commissioner. There's quite stringent limitations. And I'll tell you that the commission certainly operates in a strictly nonpartisan fashion. I think that it would be very difficult, I think, for someone to come in, interact with them in any respect, and even know what political party they actually belong to. It's really great to work with them. They take that nonpartisan obligation very, very seriously.
Appreciate that they do that, and thank you for the answer. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mark, I have a question. Has the new leadership appointed our colleagues that you know of at this point?
Appointments will be due at the end of this month. They will continue to serve until reappointed or replaced. 2 of the 5 individuals who are up for reappointment, I believe, have been reappointed as of today. One of those I know is the paperwork is processing, but I think there are still 2 or 3 outstanding as of today. But the reappointment, this is typically pretty normal. Often there's usually 1 or 2 that lasts a little bit beyond that January 31st term.
That's interesting. When are the SSI reports due? Is it in April, April 30th?
It is for candidates, that's correct. State employees are June.
State employees, June. Very, very good. Any other questions, committee? All right, well,
I'm
keep
sorry,
going.
Madam Chair?
Oh, oh, yes.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, David Haley. I don't know if you can hear me or not. I had one quick
Yes, we can.
question. I'm
Okay.
sorry I didn't hear the beginning. I'm just learning WebEx. Mr. Scoglin, has there been an uptick in the electronic filings, and has your office been able, that was been a question for a long time because there are still some that were available by fax. And what percentage of electronic filing now reports? And has that been better for the efficiency of the office and the return?
I will tell you, I very much appreciate this segue because we're going to talk about that on legislative recommendations as well. But in terms of the number of e-filers today, right now, the number of electronic filers is definitely increasing. On the Senate side, 29 of the current senators filed electronically, and 11 did not. On the House side, 86 representatives filed electronically, and 39 did not. What it will tell you about the efficiency item is the primary efficiency benefit of this for us is that when, as long as there's a large number of reports that are being submitted manually or handwritten or anything like that, that aren't through the electronic system, as long as that's happening, we are going to individually line item every single line on every campaign finance report. So the next time you pull up a 250-page campaign finance report, have a quick thought about my staff. But so unfortunately, as long as there's a large number of manual reports like that, then we're going to continue entering it that way. If electronic filing were mandated and it became the rule, not the exception, which is the case today, then that would mean that we could take the entire Secretary of State database of campaign finance reports and copy it over, which reduces approximately a month and a half to 2 months of work into approximately 30 minutes. Which really, as you can imagine, would be a drastic improvement to the efficiency of our office, especially around the October report, because the October report, we can't even begin doing desk reviews for compliance of the October report until after the January report is already being filed, which means people are correcting 2 reports because of a mistake they made in October. Certainly not ideal. So we're looking to try to work to resolve that. And mandatory electronic filing would be a big step in that direction. I apologize for the long answer.
Well, and brief follow-up, please, Madam Chair. And I'm sorry if this is in your printed material. I don't have access to it yet, so if I preempted it or if it's something that you're going to cover in the next part, then let's just skip it. But I am concerned about those who don't have electronic access and how they've reached out to your office to see what they can do. I know at some point you wanted all state candidates to do that, but has there been any pushback? I was probably the lone holdout for a long time, and maybe we can dispense with it and go entirely electronic. I just want to know if there's an isolated example where there is a hardship for those who want to try and continue to file electronically, or not electronically, but by paper.
Senator, I certainly appreciate that comment because that is actually something that is very important to me as well. Nobody should be prevented from filing for office because of a technocratic barrier of a requirement to e-file. As a result, the House Elections Committee last year, when they considered this legislation, which they've passed out favorably a few times and have done so again this year, the legislation includes, which we include as part of our recommendations, that a waiver can be granted for good cause. So if someone simply does not have reliable broadband access, all they have to do is contact our office, let us know that that's a problem, and we would grant them the ability to file in any other permissible way. But it would be the exception then, not the rule, which means that we would certainly have a lot more flexibility in that capacity. But I absolutely share that concern and believe that the recent adopters of states who have moved towards e-filing requirements have included either a good cause or an affidavit requirement of some kind to allow people to file even if they don't have reliable internet access. Because I certainly agree with you.
Thank you, Mr. Scope, and thank you, sir. Thank you, Madam Chair, for the indulgence.
Thank you. Well, you go ahead and continue, Mark, through your report.
I'll be as brief as I can on the legislative recommendations, noting the time. The electronic filing for state candidates is our #1 recommendation. Those of you who have seen our annual report in the last several years are familiar with this discussion. Currently, this number goes up every year. There are, the number last year, which I haven't updated, is 42 states currently require electronic filing for all state candidates. Kansas is one of the 8 states that remain. So we are one of the few that do not. Again, we've talked about the cost and efficiency savings, so I won't go into that too much, but I will note that the other thing that is great about electronic filing is that no candidate likes to receive mail from the Ethics Commission. They look down and they see it's from the Ethics Commission. They hope it's a reminder, but sometimes it's a notice that they've done something wrong. There's a lot of errors and omissions, including some that are very common, that we can catch from an electronic filing system that simply would prevent, we would catch the error before the submission of the report, which means you'd never make the error at all, which resolves a lot of concerns, I think, for candidates as well. It certainly increases transparency and decreases the time delay in presenting campaign finance data to the public, but I will note that while an important, that's an important part of this for us as well. The second item is new this year. It's disposal of campaign assets. Candidates are prohibited from using campaign assets for the personal use of the candidate, so they cannot go purchase an item and then use it personally. However, there are instances we view as violations of the law, but the statute does require some clarity, where someone can purchase a laptop or a cell phone or even a car for the campaign, and it would be ridiculous to think that they would keep that item after the campaign is over. And certainly that shares our view as well. However, to clearly prohibit this, the statute needs some correction. Now, at the federal level, when closing a campaign account, you have to sell furniture, equipment, things like that, and return those assets for fair market value to your campaign fund before terminating your account. This would resolve the problem from our perspective, and we think is the cleanest and most efficient resolution without causing additional hassle for candidates. The third item is a cleanup provision. A few years ago, we lowered the grace period and increased civil penalties for lobbyists. When we did that, there created a small conflict in the notice provision regarding when the grace period begins running for campaigns or for lobbyists. So when we notice that someone has not filed as a lobbyist, we put a failure to file in the mail. The conflict is that it's not entirely clear from statute whether or not that grace period starts running from the date we put it in the mail or the date that we have confirmed that they receive it. I'll tell you that if it's from the date they receive it, this would eviscerate the law. There would be functionally no ability to enforce this. We would never be able, it sometimes takes months to get certified mail confirmation back in our office. Our view is that the notice provision is intended to be from the date that it's sent, which is just like campaign finance because lobbyists know those deadlines. The fourth item is an update. This we've talked about before. Clear and conspicuous attribution should be required on social media platforms. Right now, the paid for attribution is required to appear at the end of the item. Facebook doesn't have an end as one example. It just scrolls backward forever. So compliance is either technically difficult or perhaps impossible. So this would be an update to the statute that resolves social media. We also have one recommendation from 2019 I'm going to briefly talk about, which I'm mostly talking about because we think that there's particular concerns about this issue before the Ethics Commission recently. Right now, it is possible, it's important that investigations are confidential for the Ethics Commission. It protects the reputation of individuals who are accused, and it certainly defends the integrity of the investigation as well. However, the statute currently allows us to use a state employee and designate state employees as assisting in the investigation. So for example, if we're investing a bank regulator, we might need assistance from the state bank commissioner's office to ensure that we understand the area. However, we don't have the ability to do so with federal employees. So if we want to consult with the FEC, the FBI, our ability to do so is rather limited in an investigation. We don't think this was the intention of the statute, but it is the text of the statute. So we view this as a fairly simple cleanup provision as well. But that is the final recommendation that we are reviving for this year as well. I can certainly take any questions. It looks like I managed to stay under that clock a little bit, but.
You did a nice job, Mark. You did. I have a few questions. We'll see if the committee has any questions first. Well, let's talk about e-filing then. I do use it. It's tricky, but I appreciate the fact I know where my mistake is and it tells me what cell to go to fix that. So I do value that. Did you receive any CARES funds, any of the federal dollars?
We applied for $90 of CARES Act that we applied for a plexiglass barrier in our front office, but we did not apply because we don't run the e-filing system. We did not apply for any other funding.
So the e-filing is the Secretary of State's
That is correct.
office?
And I know that they continue to make improvements of that system. Their IT team honestly is excellent. I love getting to work with them when I have the opportunity to. I'm hoping that if e-filing passes, then we can identify if there are any concerns legislators and candidates have with the e-filing system, identify the largest complaints and make sure that we can resolve those before we get to another election cycle. I think that you're right, there are certainly instances where so the columns have to be arranged in a particular order if you're uploading an Excel spreadsheet, for example, and there are certainly improvements that can be made there. But I'm confident that the Secretary of State's IT team is always working on improvements.
And we can work with them. I see a lot of opportunity there. Once you're used to this system and you're limited on your choices with the drop-down boxes, it's very efficient. But it's not as user-friendly as I think most of us would like to see. And well, we can work with Secretary of State on that because I see a lot of opportunity there. And I was wondering if the federal dollars could have helped that too. So I know how to pursue that. Was there any other questions? I am interested in, several years ago, we did try to move the social media piece up, but we ran into problems with how to do it. Do you think we've perfected that enough that we should try it again, putting the attribute at the beginning?
This would resolve it so that actually it doesn't even need to appear at the beginning. It has to appear in a clear and conspicuous location, which just means, for example, on Facebook, in the about or the bio, anything like that would be permissible. It really, the only change that it would be making is to make it so that it would not have to appear at the end of an electronic communication. It would just have to be clear and conspicuous, which is the standard that a lot of states have moved towards for electronic communication for exactly this reason.
We certainly got hung up on that. We thought we had the right answer, but it just didn't happen. So maybe we can take another stab. Any other questions?
Madam Chair.
Yes, Senator Fascadeau.
Thank you so much. Just for clarification, that message paid for by, does it depend on if it's on your regular Facebook page or your political page?
If a candidate is making a post that includes express advocacy, so if they're saying vote for me, support me, donate to my campaign, defeat this person, then it doesn't matter where they are posting that. They need to have paid for attribution either on the post or somewhere on the page is how we're currently enforcing it, which functionally is what the statute update would do. We always allow that to occur. However, it doesn't matter for candidates whether it's on your personal page or a campaign page. This probably was never parsed into law as a separation, largely because, especially a lot of local candidates, they don't have separate pages. They just have their personal page that they use functionally as a campaign page. And distinguishing that difference would be difficult. But that is Twitter is the one exception because there's a written-in exception for Twitter to avoid paid for attribution because of the size limit on messages.
Thank you.
Well, Mark, I have to tell you, I do enjoy your staff when I call in. They are quick to respond. They know the answer right away. And if any case, they've gotten back to me. So I've appreciated your.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Senator Haley.
Okay, I'm sorry, you faded out a little bit. I don't know if you have Senator Warren's microphone today. My quick question was if there's been a bill introduction to tweak our current law regarding electronic and other property purchased that Mr. Scoldland referenced. If there is a bill introduction in the offing or if that's already been prepared. So the disposal or the redistribution of electronic and other property purchased with campaign funds would be clear.
First, I'd like to appreciate the comments about my staff. I will certainly pass that on. I'm very lucky to have the staff that I do. In response to the question about the bill introduction regarding disposal of campaign assets, I am not aware of a bill that has been introduced this session on that question. That doesn't mean it is not in process. I'm just unaware of an introduction of that item at this time.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Well, we could talk to you all day, Mark, but we have one more bill to do. And thank you for coming over. And if we have another topic we'd like to discuss, you come back in and visit with us.
Thank you
Okay.
very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here as always.
Thank you, Mark. All right, well, next on the agenda, just move right along, is a hearing on Senate Bill 17. And Jason, did you have an update on the bill for us?
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the committee, you should have received a memo from our office summarizing Senate Bill 17. This bill would amend the Open Records Act regarding charges that a public agency may charge for production of records that they produce pursuant to an open records request. Generally, public agencies can charge a reasonable fee for providing access to or the copies of those documents. The conflict arises when the requesting entity is Legislative Post Audit, because we have a statute under the Legislative Post Audit Act that authorizes state agencies to cooperate and provide those documents upon request by LPA. And so Senate Bill 17 would amend the Open Records Act simply to clarify that these requests by LPA are not, in fact, open records requests, but are made pursuant to the Legislative Post Audit Act, and therefore no charges can be assessed to LPA for production of those documents. The bill would go into effect on July 1st of this year if it was enacted, and I'd be happy to answer any questions of the committee.
Any questions for Jason? Okay, thank you, Jason. So we have our first proponent, Justin Stowe, Legislative Post Auditor. So welcome to the committee, Justin.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. So Jason did a perfect job explaining this bill. It is very narrowly constructed to try to resolve a very specific issue for our office, which is because we have statutory authority under the Post Audit Act, we make requests of agencies all the time for not only public information, which is covered by the Kansas Open Records Act, but also confidential information to do our job. When we do that, they sometimes confuse us with other public agencies and say, hey, we should be able to charge you for a fee if we have an extensive amount of staff time that it requires to put that information together. And our point is, no, that's not true. You're being audited. You are state government or local government who receive taxpayer funding, and we have the statutory authority to do that work. So that's all this bill is intended to do. It just essentially tries to make sure that the Kansas Open Records Act is consistent with the Post Audit Act. So that is the point. We've contacted 19 other state audit offices. We actually sent out a question through our National Association of State Auditors, Comptrollers, and Treasurers to find out what their policy stance is. They are unanimous. They, like us, do not pay for this type of information. We feel like it is inherent in the process, the oversight process, that if you are a state or local government subject to audit, that you need to cooperate with the auditors on your own time and expense. I will remind the legislature, you've already paid for the audit through our appropriation, which is already a little unusual. Many businesses have to pay the auditors to come in and do the work. They don't usually bill the auditors for their own time. So that is a specific attempt. Because we don't pay for this, you might ask the question, what is the problem we are trying to solve here? My response is twofold. First, because of this confusion, which is warranted because most agencies deal with the Kansas Open Records Act and not with post audit, so I understand agencies' confusion. We've always been able to work it out historically with agencies, but it takes a lot of time and effort, and we work through their legal counsel, and we have to educate them who we are. And by the time we get done, it's very frustrating because we all feel like, well, this is a big waste of time because this should be pretty clear, but it's not because there's just a little, I think, unintentional overlap. The second issue, which is maybe even a greater concern for me, is that this could end up creating a barrier for us to do the work that you requested us to do. So, for example, very recently, we were asked to do an audit on association fees and dues. That actually ties in a little bit to what Mark was talking about. We surveyed thousands of state and local and small governments. We do not have the time and resources to explain to those thousands of governments that we have access to this without paying, and they would have I had no expectation of them that they'd have any idea who we are, and they did not. So they think that the Kansas Open Records Act is in force. So even if they want to cooperate, it creates problems like that for us because there's this conflict and they don't recognize it. So I might then conclude, Madam Chair, with I have read all the other testimony. To me, at least in some, I know they will have their chance to opine. I just want to kind of reconcile mine with theirs. I see kind of two other issues that are out there. One, it seems the press is asking for a similar exception. That is a policy decision of the Kansas Legislature. I have no opinion on what you decide to do or handle the press's request for that. I might just simply point out, I don't feel I'm asking because I don't have it. I believe I do have that access under the Post-Audit Act. I am a statutorily created oversight agency that works at the direction of an oversight committee, the Joint Post-Audit Committee, 10 members, both chambers. I feel like I'm a little different than the press. I already have this authority. I'm just asking to clarify a small amount of overlap in state law. Second, I know some cities have expressed concern that if you give us this power, that I might do something radical like ask them for 10,000 copies of their records in hard copy and make them expensive. Two real quick comments on that. One, we don't operate that way. We far prefer electronic access. It's way more efficient. I don't know the last time we requested anything in hard copy. More importantly, there is a form of redress for counties and city governments, which is the Post-Audit Committee, who I report to. Senator Thompson is currently on that committee. Senator Bowers was on that committee. If I do something that is egregious, they can go to my oversight committee and say, what is this? Post-Audit is asking me to do something that's ludicrous, and they will let me know it. So I feel like I have some checks and balances. I do have to work reasonably with my auditees because I have an oversight body here and just in terms of good practice. So I understand the concern is that authority might expand too great, and it's a valid and reasonable concern. I'll tell the committee. I don't think in practice that creates much of a real threat to those entities currently. So, Madam Chair, thank you for the opportunity to testify. Happy to answer any questions the committee members may have.
Committee, are there any questions for Justin? Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know the legislature has asked Legislative Post-Audit to review school districts and expenses for those districts. When we do that, generally, not every school has to provide the information that we've identified or Legislative Post-Audit identifies. How expensive is that for those school districts? Is there any way or any responsibility that the legislature has when it's selecting a subset of entities and incurring costs for them?
I'm sure, Senator Francisco, thank you for that question. I don't know what the actual cost would be to those school districts because they don't charge us and we don't bill them, so there's no interaction there. I will tell you, yes, they have other jobs to do, and so always being audited is an inconvenience, and we recognize that. That's always the case. They've got a million things to do. The truth is most agencies have been able to work that out historically with us, and we try to remain sensitive, so we try to be efficient and effective when we work with them. There is certainly a cost to them in terms of their time and resources. Our stance as your auditors is that is a part of doing business on the taxpayer's behalf. If it were to become so egregious that then that does come up and we talk about that, I might even consult with my committee members and say, we have a problem here. They think that what we're asking for is just ludicrous, and so we have to come up with some other recourse. So historically been able to handle it. I'm not saying that at times, of course, it is demanding on them and adds some cost, but I couldn't tell you what those were specifically, Senator.
Senator Dahl.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for coming. Senator Francisco, what she said brought a question to my mind. In your history, the history of your post-audit, have you been asked to post-audit, or legally can you post-audit a private school? I wanted to talk long enough so this thing would do this, so I would.
Thank you, Senator. So the Post-Audit Act most clearly gives us access to audit state government and local subdivisions of state government. So in terms of a private sector school, the only way we could touch them is if they receive some type of state funding through the state, if they receive type of, and then our access typically would be relegated to that specific funding stream or source. So we can't go look at private sector entities in their entirety, only the portion of business that they would do on behalf of state funding or through state funding.
Any other questions?
Madam Chair?
Yes, Senator Frascado.
Yes, thank you. So the fee that you're asking to in this bill to not pay, is that a standard fee that you would pay, or historically, what is the fees that you've paid?
Madam Chair, Senator Falscato, thank you for that question. So the fee structure that is in CORA, as I understand, I'm not a subject matter expert on CORA, so perhaps the revisers, if you need technical details, I can give you a big picture view. It's essentially if it takes a significant amount of staff time and effort, or the amount of copies become voluminous, agencies have the option of telling the public or the public agency, this is becoming a real burden and I'm going to charge you for the paper, the ink, my staff's time to compile it. So that's kind of what CORA allows. Again, we don't pay that as a matter of policy because we feel like you're under audit and that information to us, we are not a public agency asking for that. I would clarify that this bill makes it clear we only get to waive that fee when we are asking for information in the process of an audit. If I go ask another state agency, Mr. Scoldland, for example, hey, Mark, I would like to see some of this information just for my own edification, then of course I am subject to CORA and I will pay those fees. If I'm just asking for information and I'm going to put a big request on them, then like any other agency, I have to pay it. But we're talking about once the legislature has already given me the audit authority to go look into a concern.
Don't see any other questions. Just in a nutshell, can you tell the committee how many audits you do a year, the process, just real quick, so they, I think it's a fascinating process and you don't waste time. There's no doubt about that. So I can see why you like electronic filings or electronic information sent to you. So just give us just a real quick brief. And the history of the post audit, we used to have a post auditor in the state of Kansas and how the committee was formed.
Yeah, so years and years ago, we had an elected state auditor, I think maybe in the 80s at some point. That came under the purview of the legislature. So for as long as I've been at post audit 14 years now, they've always been appointed by the post audit committee. So that committee directs our work in terms of what audits we are going to do. Once they assign us that work, we give them the answer that we give all you, which is the truth as best as we can tell it. And so that's, whether it's convenient or not, that's our goal, is just to tell you exactly what we think is happening out there. Sometimes that's popular, sometimes it's not. Obviously, that's audit. So in any given year, we do about 8 to 10 IT security audits. So that's some work that we do that's not very public work. If you've been on like JCIT or Kansas Security, you'll hear about these audits. Post audit obviously hears about this. That's us essentially checking the security controls of state agencies, much like you hear about in the private sector, making sure we are not susceptible to data breaches. So we do 8 to 10 of those a year. We do about 10 to 12 performance audits. So those are the boutique concerns that you bring to us and that we put in front of our committee. They cover any and everything in state government, K-12 education, corrections, juvenile justice reform, all those. And then we typically do a handful of limited scope audits as well. Those are much smaller, more narrow audits. And then just a couple of tax evaluations that we've started to do per a new addition to our statute. So.
It's a very fascinating committee, and it moves fast also. So thank you for doing that for us. We appreciate your work too, Justin. So.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right. So do we have any other opponents here who'd like to testify? Okay. Let's move to the neutral. We have Deborah Barnes, Staff Attorney, League of Kansas Municipalities. Good morning, Deborah.
Thank you for your help. Good morning, Chairman. I'm Deborah Barnes, a Staff Attorney at the League of Kansas Municipalities, and thanks for the opportunity to give neutral testimony on Senate Bill 17. As you've heard, this bill would prohibit any public agency from charging a fee to the Legislative Division of Post Audit for access to or copies of records for the purpose of conducting an official audit. When considering this legislation, I think it's helpful to put post-audit committees' authority in context, and Justin already did this just now, as you've heard. The LPA has the ability and the authority to access records through KSA 46-1114. And the rationale and the context for LPA to request records isn't from open government or freedom of information arrangements under the Kansas Open Records Act, but rather under the legislation governing legislative post-audit. So following on from that, I would suggest that logically it might make sense to spell out that the access is cost-free in the Post-Legislative Audit Act rather than in the KORA statute. And perhaps it's worth saying at this point that I'm not aware of any of our member cities having charged any fees for providing records to legislative post-audit. So should the committee decide that the signposting for cost-free access to records should be in KORA, then we would respectfully request that the exception be a narrow one. As you've heard, there are plenty of other organisations that might want to make a request for cost-free access. Open government is valued in Kansas, and the hundreds of requests that our cities receive every year for records of all sorts show that open government is alive and well. Providing the information can be resource intensive, as you'll see from my written testimony. Every year, the requests get more numerous and more complex. And we want to avoid multiple carve-outs from a city's authority to recover reasonable costs for providing information. So I'd make 2 points. I'd leave you with 2 points. One is, if the city does go ahead, if the committee does go ahead with the KORA route for signposting post-audit free access to records, please would you consider the consequences of creating special classifications of requesters under KORA. Secondly, the fees arrangement in KORA are clearly signposted as being for the purposes of this Act, and auditors are acting under the authority of a different Act when requesting access to records. So I would leave you with the request that you consider spelling out cost-free arrangements in KSA 46-1114, which governs the Legislative Post-Audit Division operations. I'm happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time, which would appear to be now.
Wait, thank you, Deborah. Yes, Senator Thompson has a question. Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. How would you categorize? I mean, there's so many different versions of requests that could happen if you were trying to, categorize those which are not problematic for counties versus the bigger requests. I think you're asking for us to separate those out. That's what I get from your testimony?
Well, no, cities have never asked legislative post-audit to pay any fees, and they wouldn't going forward. I think what the previous conferee suggested was that it's a problem of education, as far as I can understand. And we certainly do a lot of education about the Kansas Open Records Act. He was suggesting that post-audit have to go through, have to explain, when they're approaching the smaller subdivisions. So I think that's where it comes. It's not such a question of what they're asking for.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair?
Senator Fascadeau.
Yes, so if the conferee could clarify something she said, did you say that you would, if we move forward with Senate Bill 17, that you would want us to just allow this for the post-audit division, or did you say carve out for other agencies as well? Would you
No,
clarify?
what I was trying to get across was that we want to avoid carve-outs for other agencies to be free from paying reasonable costs for for generating the information that's asked for under CORA.
Okay, thank you, Deborah. Any other questions for the league? Okay, thank you for coming. I would point out to the committee, we also have written neutral from Jay Hall, Legislative Policy Director and General Counsel, Kansas Association of Counties, City of Overland Park. And do we have any opponents in the audience? No, we do have written opponent testimony from Doug Arnstant, representing Kansas Press Association, and Allison Mazzezzi, president of the Kansas Association of Broadcasters. So thank you for everyone for coming. We got finished just on time, and Justin for coming in and working with our schedule too. So we'll close the hearing on Senate Bill 17, and I see nothing else before the committee, so we're adjourned.